Good morning. I'm Jo Reingold, and today is April 8th, 2019, and I am interviewing Kay Schachter. Hi there, Kay.
Hello.
Tell us about your family, what you remember about your grandparents, your parents, where they lived, what they did for a living, etc., and how they came to be here.
My grandfather came over from Alsace-Lorraine, France, when he was about 16 years old, and he had some experience in the corset business. So the family story is that an uncle had been in a poker game, and part of the pot was a store in Hereford, Texas, which is 45 miles southwest of Amarillo. So he and his wife that he met and chased until she agreed to marry him, settled in Hereford, Texas in about 1921, and put together what was essentially the general store. It was a men's store in downtown Hereford, and he sold mostly to the farmers, and when the Depression hit, he exchanged food for clothing, and that's how they survived the Depression. The store was remodeled 2 or 3 times. My mother was an only child. She grew up there and was kind of a violin prodigy, although she hated it, so she never played. I still have her violin. I need to do something with it. But so my mother was kind of eager to get away from Hereford. She went to school starting in Canyon, Texas, but then she went away to California and had a few adventures there before she ended up in New York. And in New York, she worked for McRae and Smith, which is a buying office, being in the clothing business. So while she was in New York, of course, she went to the Catskills, to one of those wonderful places like in Mrs. Maisel or Dirty Dancing. It was what would you call it, a Jewish getaway for people in the Catskills. And she was sitting on a fence with her long red hair and her big blue eyes, and my father walked by. He'd come back from the war, and he saw this beautiful redhead, and so the rest was history. So they married. He tried to keep her in the manner to which she was accustomed in New York, and that did not work out. So much against her will, he brought her back to Hereford, Texas, and they started the ready-to-wear business, also connected to my grandparents' store. So it wasn't a good situation being in business together. Sometimes when my grandfather would received on accounts that would really go to my father, they would end up in my grandfather's coffers. So it was not a very good situation. So when the mall came into these small towns that really destroyed the downtown businesses, my father jumped at the chance to have his own store. And my mother, being an only child and being very much kind of ruled by her parents, her family ended up being involved with my dad's store. So again, it was not a happy situation. So anyway, about 6 months later, he had an opportunity to open a store in Amarillo, 45 miles away. So they did. They opened that store, and it was beautiful. I have a picture that I gave you, and it has a picture of the chandelier that was it. My mother was very artistic, and she did all of the display for the store and all of it was just a gorgeous, gorgeous jewel, kind of like the carriage shop used to be here in Dallas. But anyway, I started working in the stores from a very young age. I have a brother. He's 18 months older than I am, and we were both raised in Hereford. I went through school there. I had some interesting experiences. Some of my very best friends growing up, about the time I got into high school, I remember, I think we were separated. We had a new high school, new junior high that was built. So she went to one in the last year and I went to the other one. And when we were reunited at the Hereford High School, in one of the first classes. I mean, I couldn't understand what happened. We weren't really friends anymore, and she would come into the store and she, just would kind of ignore me. And then one day in class, we got to talking about where everybody went to church, because our family had to travel 45 miles to Amarillo to the nearest synagogue, which I missed more than I made. But when the subject came up, she pointed her finger at me and she said, "Ask her what she is." And that was the first time I had an inkling. It was the fact that I was Jewish, that we weren't friends anymore. So when I went home in tears and I told my mom said that she had grown up with this little girl's father and that he was also anti-Semitic. So that was my first experience with understanding just how different we were, which is not to say I didn't already know, because Mom and Dad always made it a point with us that we had to be an example to everyone because we were Jewish and we were different. And that always had a big impact on me and my brother.
Where were your dad's parents and your dad from? Where did he grow up?
Well, my dad grew up in New York. His parents were immigrants, and apparently his father came from a wealthy family in Poland and had a shoe factory. And a woman who worked there left to go to the States, and he followed her and was thereby disowned by his family. So he became a brass maker, and he worked with brass, and I have a pair of hands that are my father's. I think my brother has that now. Mm-hmm. And what I have of my I never met the man, it's a mortar and pestle made out of brass that he had made. So that's what we have in our family of his. Okay. And
so I was just wondering, your dad and your mom, she's from a tiny town and he was from a big city. So
yeah, he was from the big city.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Right. And having come back from the war, he got involved with a jewelry business. And when that didn't work out, then he got involved with a dry cleaning business. And he kind of unionized it, and he was quite a mover and a shaker. He was a very handsome man. You could say my dad looked like Omar Sharif, and my mother liked to compare herself to Loretta Lynn. So they were both very handsome people, and kind of big city for Hereford. They had that very, regal look about them. And but my dad really liked being in a small town, but wherever he went, he was still, with his New York accent. He was always a Yankee. But I heard that he would go with the police chief and drive around with him at night to see kind of the action that would go on after hours in Hereford. So he was a bit of an adventurer, I guess. So what
did you do after high school? Where did you go?
Well, during high school, because I missed so much at the temple, I volunteered there. As soon as I got a driver's license, I would drive to Amarillo and they wanted to pay me, and I wouldn't let them. And last time I was there, they still have a clock on the wall that I donated with what would have been my income. But I went away to, my brother went to the University of Colorado at Boulder because we had some family in New Mexico, the Moise family, and their sons had gone to CU in Boulder. So, of course, if they did, then my mother thought, well, that's where Sheldon should go. So he went there as well, and he was there, so I went there. And then we got in a little bit of trouble in the store in 1960, let's see, what was that, like 1968, 69. You may remember the mini skirts that came, that were the fad then, and then all of a sudden, wham, it became the midi, and the lengths dropped to below calf length. And it was such a dramatic change and such a shock. in a place like Hereford, it just, my parents got into financial trouble because that was the fashion, and they went with the fashion, and the people in Hereford dug their heels in, and they just weren't going to do it. So my brother was taken out of school after his second year to help pay off the SBA loan. And I think that had a pretty dramatic effect on my brother and led to the fact later on that he met a Baptist girl who had it in her head that she was not only going to convert Sheldon, she was going to convert the entire family. But they married under rather, shotgun circumstances in her hometown of Muskogee, Oklahoma. And that had a real effect on my parents. My dad never really forgave him. I mean, my dad had a way of always throwing things up that you would do wrong. And so for, right up till the day he died, he would throw that up. But
Did you stay there in Boulder? Or did you finish college there?
I also wanted to get away from Hereford. I had the feeling, had I not gone to CU in Boulder to go to school, that I might never escape. So there was a young man that I met in going to school, and we kind of had to get married. And, I didn't have any children with him, but, Roe v. Wade, yay. And so I was married to him for about 4.5 years. After about the first 2.5, I knew it wasn't right. So it took me another 1.5 years to get out of it. And I came back home. I got involved again in the business. And at this point, we had the 3 stores. We had the Hereford downtown store, the Sugarland Mall store, and the Amarillo store.
Sugarland, Houston?
Sugarland Mall.
Oh, that's
in
the name of
Hereford,
it.
Texas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the mall that they put in there.
Okay.
So once I moved back home, Sheldon was married, and he had a couple of kids, and I was involved. We were all involved in the business together. And of course, the Amarillo store was $1 million store, whereas the Hereford stores were not. So my parents' interest was really more now in Amarillo, where they were kind of free from my grandfather. And so that was that.
And they picked up and moved? Or they just kept driving back?
We had an apartment in Amarillo, but our home was still in Hereford. And we would always go to the Hereford Country Club and enjoy the wonderful food there. And there was a swimming pool. And even when my children were young, we would drive to Hereford and enjoy the club, because we didn't join any clubs in Amarillo. There were still policies preventing Jewish people from joining those clubs.
But not in Hereford?
Not in Hereford.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, my parents helped found that club and helped interview the wonderful manager that ran it. So yeah, my parents were very much civic leaders in Hereford, which is why they toed the mark for us so much that we should be an example, which made it difficult in high school for me, and probably for my brother too, because we were always touted to toe a certain mark, and I was always dressed to the nines, having a clothing store, of course. And one other small town little fact is, I think I was the only child that ever had a standing appointment at the beauty shop with my mother. Do you remember those days when you'd have a standing appointment?
My mom, not me, but yes, I remember.
My mother made me do that too.
Okay.
So,
well.
I was kind of the weird kid in high school, and I didn't date. My father didn't think that I should, and whereas my brother played football, so he was very popular, I was the weird kid. But there were reasons for that. I can't blame all the kids at school for that. I had a bad experience at the Hereford Country Club, and the man was ridden out on the rail, but no one ever talked about it. My parents didn't even go into any detail. After I confided in my brother what happened to me, they never came back and asked how far things went. But after that experience, it affected me, and maybe I was a little withdrawn, and maybe the kids in Hereford, of course no one knew, so there were probably reasons. But I did go back for my 25-year high school reunion, and hoping that I had grown as a person. I was married and had children and had a very successful life here in Dallas. And but it was very interesting. 25 years later, it was like nothing had changed. I was still the weird girl. Nobody wanted to talk to me, and I found myself very isolated, just like I had been in high school. So that was quite an interesting experience. That, you know, I'm sure if I went back now and we had another reunion, it would probably be the same experience.
Wow.
But
some things never change.
Some things never change.
So what things were you involved in Amarillo?
In Amarillo, I was president of the Merchants Association at Western Plaza Mall for 3 or 4 years. So we directed a lot of the business that happened at the mall, the promotions we had. I was on the zoning board. I was involved in all the lady civic activities. We had an opera guild that started. We were involved with the symphony. We just had our 40th wedding anniversary, and the kids put together an album for us. And in looking through the album, there are pictures of my husband and me dressed to the nines in, I have my
Go ahead.
symphony ball outfits. And so we were very, very involved civically and also in the temple. My husband was the president of the Temple B'nai Israel in Amarillo. And
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
so we were very active both in the temple and in the civic community in Amarillo. And
How did you meet your husband? Back up a little.
one of the first things I did for the temple when I moved back to Dallas, I hadn't even been divorced yet from my first husband, but I moved back to Amarillo from Denver, where I had been living with my first husband. And the first thing I did was there was a big fair at Thompson Park that the Junior League put on. And the Temple B'nai Israel had a food booth. They had cheesecake flown in from Chicago, and they had bagels and cream cheese and knishes, and I worked the booth. I did the early shift from 12 to 3, and then I was off from 3 to 6 so I could walk around, and then I worked from 6 to 9. My parents were in New York at market during this time, so I came with like $4. And I had no idea everything. It's a fundraiser, and everything was so expensive. I couldn't afford anything. And during that first shift from 12 to 3, these young people were kind of hanging around the booth, and this one guy was leaning over the booth with one of those bagels, waving it around, going, "Oi, oi, oh, this bagel is so good." And I was hungry, so I leaned over and I bit his bagel. And that's how I met Carrie Schachter. And he just gave me this look like, "Who are you and what have you just done to my bagel?" And then he walked away. And actually, I was looking at his friend. But anyway, from 3 to 6 when I walked around on my own, I passed him and, I did the, like embarrassed, but what are you going to do? And then a few minutes later, he tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around, and he says, "I don't believe we've met. My name's Carrie Schachter." And his father was there from Denver. He was from Denver. And so Carrie and I walked around the park and went to ride the amusements. And so that's how we met.
Okay.
And every year after that, we would come with our children and work the the Temple B'nai Israel booth, and we had our kids in the booth with us. And
Good.
now, even our wedding was a bit of a event, because there hadn't been a Jewish wedding at Temple B'nai Israel in Amarillo in years. And Carrie and I had been dating about 9 months, and of course we almost broke up when he found out I wasn't actually divorced. But shortly after that, I was divorced, and he was put into the hospital with mono, and a pretty bad case. Of course, it would be if you're in the hospital. So he asked me, so I'm not doing anything right now. How about we just get married? And I said, he had asked me before, and after coming out of a rather unhappy marriage, my opinion of marriage was not too great. So I would say, we get along so well, why spoil it? And familiarity breeds contempt. So I had all these sayings I would throw at him. But at this point, my parents knew I was dating a Jewish boy. And my dad had already worked on me on one of our car rides from Amarillo to Hereford, saying, well, what are you going to do if he asks you to marry him? And I said, well, he's already asked, and I said no. And he says, well, I think you ought to think about this. And I think with my father, it was a matter of, my husband was an attorney, and I think my father saw dollar signs of free legal advice. So he says, well, I think you need to reconsider this. So when Carrie mentioned that in the hospital that day, I said, well, if you really want to marry me, call my dad. And if my dad says I can marry you, then I'll marry you. So our saying is that he never asked, and I never said yes. But we got married. And when did we get married? 24 hours later in the hospital with a rabbi.
Oh my.
He called his parents. He said, Mom, Dad, I have some good news and I have some bad news. The bad news is I'm in the hospital. I've got a really bad case of mono. But the good news is I'm getting married tomorrow at 5 o'clock. So if you want to come, you better get in the car and start driving. So they did make it from Denver just enough time, maybe 15 minutes before Rabbi Sharf, who was our rabbi at the time, married Carrie and I in the hospital. After which I went to the Amarillo Club with my parents, his parents, and some family friends, and danced and had a great time, and then went home and slept in my own bed. It was like I hadn't even gotten married. And when my husband got out of the hospital the next day, my parents had left to go back to New York to market, and we just started living together. So it was great. It was like I didn't get married. I was just starting to live with this guy. So that's how we got married.
That's very strange.
Yes, it's very strange.
Did you ever have another ceremony anytime later on, or no?
We were actually going to have a ceremony for our 25th wedding anniversary, and his father unexpectedly died of a heart attack. And my father had come to me, and about 6 weeks later, he died of stomach cancer. So we did not. And as I said, we just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary, and so I don't think we'll be going there.
Okay, all right. Listen, whatever works.
Yeah. So when you come to our house, you'll see pictures of our children's marriages, but you won't see anything about ours. But I do have a album that the lady who worked in our shoe department was at the wedding, and she took pictures, and it looks like a wake because my husband is lying in a hospital bed in a suit, and I'm sitting in my St. John knit next to the bed, and when it came time after the wedding that you break the glass, they put a plastic hospital glass on the ground, and he got out of bed long enough to break it, and then he got back in bed, and he said, I'm tired, will y'all please leave? So that was our wedding. It was very painless. So when
very inexpensive, right?
Yes.
Except for the hospital bill.
Well, yeah, but yeah, that's about right.
So how long did you stay in Amarillo as a married couple?
We lived in Amarillo up until 1989 when we closed the store in Amarillo. My mother died in 1984. She had metastasized breast cancer that went into Klebsiella pneumonia. And after she passed away, I ran the store with Dad very successfully. Then Southmark Corporation had bought the mall in Amarillo, and we had signed an agreement to expand our store. What was happening is many other specialty stores were opening in Amarillo, and the problem with being in a mall is you don't have a back entrance so that people can just walk in. So to get to Alexander's, they would have to go in the mall and come all the way around. So part of our Southmark Corporation agreement, which was a $500,000 deal that my dad got a check, was that we were going to have a back entrance with a canopy where our customers, our very exclusive customers in Amarillo, could just drive up, park, and walk in. And on good faith, we went ahead, went to market, and we prepared for just such an event. And then, as you may know, Southmark Corporation went belly up. They took us to court in Amarillo to get their $500,000 back, and I was the main witness who testified that we had signed the agreement in good faith and spent the money, to which we were in hock to all of our vendors. So the agreement was that we could keep the $500,000, of which we didn't have it anymore because we spent it, and we should close the store within 6 months and move out. So we had a going out of business sale, and we involved a professional promoter for this that brought in a lot of merchandise. My dad went to market and bought a lot of discount merchandise and offshore merchandise, and we did more in 6 months than we probably did in 2 years.
Wow.
And basically, I was the one who went to the bank and paid off the SBA, paid off the loan at the bank, because that's really what the only thing my dad's signature was on the bank. So I took care of that, and I'm not sure how much I should say, but
whatever you want, or not.
The rest of the cash was kind of siphoned off, and after the store closed, my dad moved to Florida and lived very comfortably. Yes. And I got paid off by him. It took some talking to for him to follow through on our agreement, but he finally did, and that's how the store ended. At the time, he thought that he and I were going to go back into business together, but I had been having a lot of flack from the ladies. If my dad was alive today with the Me Too movement, he'd be lined up against a wall and shot. But I had a lot of my very good customers. They put up with it as long as my mother was alive. But after my mom passed away, and I called these ladies, oh, I went to market, I found this for you, I bought this in your size. They would tell me, look, I love you, I love your clothes, but I just can't come in the store. I just don't like the way your father takes me around. And so I was losing a lot of my very good, lovely lady customers. So when Dad thought we were going to go back in business together, I told him that I had other plans. So I went back to West Texas State University, and I got my degree. I got my business degree in finance and management. And shortly thereafter, my husband's law firm, this is when the savings and loan scandal was going on. Right. And my husband's firm was very much involved with that, but they needed to be in Dallas. So his law partner asked if he would be interested in starting a law firm in Dallas. And Dad had already kind of started preparing me for this. My dad was always a very, he saw the road ahead. And I think he knew he wanted to leave Amarillo. So with him wanting to leave Amarillo, he wanted to know that I would be situated somewhere else well. Okay. So when Carrie came home and said, well, what do you think about us moving to Dallas? I said, great, let's do it. because I didn't want to open a store, and I certainly didn't want to go to work for one of what had been our competitors, even though I had quite a book, you might say, but I just didn't want to do that. So he opened the law firm in Dallas while I continued to live in Amarillo, and the kids needed to finish school. So for a good 10 months, Carrie would be in Dallas during the week and come home just on the weekends. And during this time was a wonderful time, having, everything's ordained, Allah Akbar. The rabbi at the temple had been approached. There was a Jewish girl from Paris who needed to live with a family. She was there on the International Exchange Forum.
Mm-hmm.
So Geraldine Sevilla from Paris, France, came to live with us, and she was basically an adult in the house. I was very much into long-distance bike riding at this time, so having her in the house, I could leave the house at 6 in the morning and, do my 85 miles and then come back home. So it was wonderful, and of course, during this time, I was also pregnant with our fourth. So Teddy Hannah, her real name is Hannah Louise Schachter, but she's named after my mother. My mother was Harriet Baer, B-A-E-R, but because she had red hair and big blue eyes all her life, she was Teddy Bear. So Hannah, from birth, we would call her Teddy Bear, and with Bear being B-A-E-R. And so
That's cute.
now that she's in Germany, she's known as Hannah, but to us, she's still the Bear. But anyway, so it was just great having Geraldine there, to have another adult and a Jewish girl to boot. And my kids are still in touch with her. Teddy is working on her doctorate in Jewish medieval antiquities in Heidelberg, Germany, and she has to go look at the documents written in Latin and in French at the Paris Museum, and she stays with Geraldine at her apartment while she's there. So it's the gift that keeps on giving.
It does.
So we're still in touch with Geraldine.
So how many years have you lived here now, Dallas?
Well, we moved here in 89, and so you do the math. What's that, 30 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been here 30 years.
Practically a native, right?
Yeah, getting the children in school here, even that was an adventure. My husband went through a very orthodox period of his life in Denver, where he laid tefillin, and so he really wanted our children to be able to walk into any Jewish synagogue setting and feel at ease and at home. So although he looked at Solomon Schechter, all of our kids started at Akiba. And Akiba was, it was a learning experience, and I should have known after my first experience of walking up to a man that I met in the social hall and went to shake his hand, and he refused me. I should have known then that maybe this wasn't the best idea. But anyway, it was a learning experience, and we did make a very good friend there. The kids had to be tutored in Hebrew, and we had a wonderful Hebrew teacher, Isaac Buttball. I became very good friends with his wife, Rachel, and Isaac belonged to an Orthodox synagogue here in Dallas. At the time, we were synagogue shopping. We had hoped to join a conservative synagogue, and we went to Sheriff, put in our application, and it had been about 3 months. We hadn't heard from them. So anyway, we were kind of open still at this time. So we went to Ohev Shalom, and they were just lovely there. At this time, they were meeting in the second story of a shopping center. And it was Isaac's birthday, which is the only way we would have gone, because Orthodox, I didn't think, coming from Hereford, that I was, the right material for that situation. But they were just all so lovely. So we we were interested, and we did come back, and we made some friendships there that we still have today. But at this time, we did call Sheriff and say, we put in an application, and we haven't heard. It's been 3 months, and we were told that the board was having a tiff with Rabbi Offsire, and everything was on hold during this time. So about that time, we went to Temple Emmanuel, and they were having the Schlinger Symposium. And the speaker at the time talked about why the rabbis at Temple Emmanuel should be allowed to wear kippot on the bima. And my husband was very impressed by that, and he felt like here was a congregation that was really trying hard to move from the left.
More centrist.
And that we needed to maybe join there and help them. And about the same time, we went to Sheriff to go to one of their services, and there was nobody there. And no one had told us that once a month they had services up at Solomon Schachter School. So here we are in this empty parking lot on a Friday night going, where are all the Jews? What kind of a place is this? So at that point, we joined Temple Emmanuel.
Okay. And you've been involved a lot.
Very involved at Temple Emmanuel, and also at Ohav Shalom. I was president of their sisterhood at Ohav Shalom from 1993 to 95, and immediately finishing that, I went in as sisterhood president of Temple Emmanuel from 1995 to 1997.
Wow.
And as soon as I finished that, I have a cute story about my first sisterhood board meeting. Of course, you have to understand, you've already heard about my retail background, right? And I was jumping off the countertops waiting on customers at the age of 6. So at my first sisterhood board meeting, the woman who was running the Judaic shop at the time made the announcement. She was giving her annual contribution from the shop of $2,500, and I was sitting there going, that sucks. So after my sisterhood presidency, I went right into the Temple gift shop, and things had changed with Jewish artistry, and Judaica had become an art form. Everyone is familiar with Gary Rosenthal, and he was a big promoter of maybe getting that started here in Dallas. But the right person for the right job at the right time, and the gift shop had been in the lower level of Temple Emmanuel where the youth wing is today. So with the renovation, during my sisterhood presidency, the temple was being renovated. And whereas our previous sisterhood presidents might have been a bit older than I was, because I was younger, I had a lot of physical responsibilities to get our things moved out of the building during this time. So our current sisterhood gift shop manager made it easy for me, because she decided just to close the Judaic shop. My predecessor, Leslie Bass, said, I'll fire her for you if you want me to at the end of mine. I said, no, these things have a way of taking care of themselves. We'll just kind of wait and see what happens. So as soon as she closed the shop, I had the whole thing packed up. I arranged for a building space in the promenade, which was near my house. That's at Beltline and Coit. And we moved everything in there. We went through everything. We called in all the other sisterhood gift shops. We let them buy what they wanted at wholesale. We cleaned it out. Having come into a sisterhood presidency, having only lived in Dallas for 5 years, I didn't know anybody. So I took the directory, and I just started going through and calling people. And you start at the front or you start at the back. And I called Anina Weinreb, and she was from New York, and she had come to Dallas, and she had a retail background, and she was in the jewelry business, and she and Ruth Kleinman became our buyers. And I had a steering committee that I set up, and we divided all the responsibilities among a manager, a buyer, a volunteer coordinator, display people, and so we got it organized. And Louise Rosenfield did all the display pieces. She's an artist here in Dallas. She does pottery, and she's quite talented. So when the gift shop opened, it was like a whole new place. The only thing was the location was bad, because it was at the very back of the building, across from a cafe, down from the ECEC, which is the Early Childhood Education Center. So it was still far away from the main activity in the lobby of the building, which we really didn't have a lobby of the building at the time. Well, now we've just finished our next renovation of $34 million at Temple Emmanuel, and the gift shop is now in the lobby. So I guess you could say that my most proud accomplishment here in Dallas is doing what my parents taught me to do, which is to run a business. And I have been running the gift shop at Temple Emmanuel 22 years as a volunteer. They have offered at times to pay me, the sisterhood, but I feel that what I do puts money to send kids to camp, to educate rabbis and future cantors, and provide onegs on our Shabbats, and everything else the sisterhood does. At our height, the gift shop has contributed $60,000 to the sisterhood budget. After the crash in 2008, economically, we are climbing back up. Now that we are in the lobby, we're up to $48,000. And I have always felt that our shop should do $200,000 gross sales a year. And I hit 150, but I'm still waiting for that 200,000. And as soon as we hit that 200,000, that's when I'll retire.
Okay, good. So what do you think overall is the best part about you moving here to a bigger city?
I think the best part about us moving to a big city is the fact that my children did have a very good Jewish education. They all know they're Jewish. We saw the handwriting on the wall when we were in Amarillo. The last thing I did in 1989 before we left was I had a bat mitzvah, and Rabbi Louis Dobin was there, and I sat with him, and we worked. When my dad found out I was doing it, he asked if he could give me a party, and he had things flown in from New York. It was wonderful.
That's true.
But of course, I'm always ahead of my time. Seems like, I was one of the first. I was the first b'nai mitzvah in Amarillo, and I still remember one of the congregants, a man who isn't always known for being the most, kind person, but he came up to me and he just said, "Bullshit." But anyway, that's a whole other story.
Didn't accept it, did he?
Well, whatever. That's Phil's problem. But we left Amarillo in June of 1989, and our wonderful rabbi left in August. So we kind of saw the handwriting on the wall. We knew we weren't going to have a rabbi. At the height in Amarillo, we had 130 families. When Carrie and I left, we had 89. And last I heard, they are at 59. But they are still there. We are still members of the Temple B'nai Israel. We still send them money. Sometimes we double pay by accident. But they have a visiting rabbi that comes in once a month. It's a student rabbi from the HUC. And We are members of Temple Emmanuel, Ohef Shalom, and about 2 years ago we joined, we had a woman from Israel that was here with a congregation in Israel. So she was like a sister from another mother to me. So we did a 10-year membership. So
very good. Wonderful.
and Rabbi Nadel was just here from that. Her husband died after that, and I think she's now in New York with her family. But we're members of 4 congregations.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add, Kay?
I don't think
No,
so.
you're good. Well, thank you so much. You have had a wonderful, rich life, and mazel tov to you for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.